There's a sentence that feels strangely difficult to say out loud, okay? And that is, I'm lonely. We can say we're tired, we can say work is stressful, we can say we've been busy. But loneliness feels different because it can sound like an admission that nobody wants us, nobody chooses us, or we somehow fail to build the right life, right? And that isn't always what loneliness means. Sometimes, you have people, your phone isn't empty, your calendar's full. But sometimes you also genuinely enjoy your own company and you can still feel lonely, right? So today I want to talk about being lonely without making it awkward, shameful, or pathetic. I want to talk about the loneliness of your 30s and 40s when your friendships change, everybody becomes busy with their own lives, and independence can make you look far more emotionally fulfilled than maybe you actually feel. Okay, so welcome back to Blaque Noire, and if you're new here, welcome to Blaque Noire. This is a community for Black women reinventing life, one honest conversation at a time. I'm Tanya, and over here at Blaque Noire, we talk about things many of us are carrying but don't always say aloud. We talk about careers, burnout, confidence, relationships, identity, aging, and what it means to really become like a new version of yourself. And we talk about all of this in a real, unfiltered, and most importantly, an honest way. So if that sounds like the kind of conversation, right, that you've been looking for, please feel free to subscribe to the channel and come over here and join us every single week. There's also the Blaque Noire Edit, which is a weekly newsletter that is sent straight to your inbox every single Sunday. And if you want to delve deeper into our conversations, you can hop on over to the Blaque Noire Sisterhood. It's our private Facebook community where basically you come as you are, right? And you join a group of women much like yourselves where we talk about anything and everything, okay? As always, I will pop all of the links to all of these descriptions in the description below. So let's get to it and talk about loneliness and why it can sometimes feel embarrassing. I think one of the reasons that loneliness can feel embarrassing is it's often difficult, right, to admit because we often interpret it as evidence, right? Evidence that we're unlikable, we're unlovable, that we haven't built strong friendships, that nobody's interested in us romantically. Evidence that everybody else has been chosen and we haven't, okay? But understand that loneliness isn't a verdict of your value, okay? It's a feeling. It's more specifically, it's information. It may be telling you that the connections currently available in your life are not matching the connection that you actually need. Now, that's not the same as saying that you have no people at all. You can have friends, but not feel able to tell them the full truth. You can have family, but not feel emotionally understood by them. You can speak to colleagues every day and still feel that nobody really knows you. You can receive messages, likes, invitations, and still feel that your life isn't deeply shared. Also, loneliness isn't about, the number of people around you. It's often about the quality, consistency, and emotional safety of the connections. Another factor of loneliness, for Black women especially, right, capability can hide a great deal. Many of us have become accustomed to, being the woman who handles everything, right? We go to work, we sort the bills, we make the appointments, we support the family, we solve the problem, we organize the birthday, we check that everybody else got home safely. And because we're functioning, people often assume that we're absolutely fine. Sometimes we even assume that we're fine ourselves, right? But being capable doesn't cancel the desire to be considered. It doesn't mean you never want somebody to call and ask, how you are without them needing something from you. It doesn't mean that you don't want a partner, to share the practical and emotional way of life with. It doesn't mean that you don't want friendships where somebody else takes the initiative. There's a particular loneliness that you can experience when you're always the reliable one, and when you rarely feel that you've been pursued, not used, not admired, not relied upon, but actually pursued, right? Remembered, invited, checked on, chosen, right? And I think a lot of independent women feel guilty about admitting that because a lot of the time we've worked so hard, right, to prove that we can do life by ourselves. But being able to do it alone and actually wanting to do it alone are two completely different sentences and scenarios. Just because you're capable of doing something, it doesn't mean that you want to do it, right? Or quite frankly, even have to do it. It begs the question, by being capable, have we created this scenario for ourselves? Let's talk about friendships, okay? In particular, adult friendships. So an adult friendship can at times be painful because it often changes without there being a clear ending, okay? People get married, they have children, they move, their careers become more demanding, they become carers, they might experience health issues, their energy changes, their priorities change, right? And it's not that anyone has necessarily done anything wrong. There may still be love there, but there's just less access. The spontaneous phone calls become scheduled catch ups. The weekly meetings become every few months, right? You stop knowing the small details of each other's lives. You still celebrate the major milestones, but you're no longer present for the ordinary days. And the ordinary days typically is where intimacy lives, right? Also, if we just take a minute and think back to when we were kids, right? Friendships were so much easier back then because we were all at exactly the same stage of life, right? We were all doing and experiencing the same things at the same time. Also, it's easier to make friends as a child because you're still young, you haven't had the life experiences that mold you, create thoughts, biases, and so forth, right? You don't have a routine yet. You're not set in your ways. You don't have responsibilities, at least most of the time. Your actions don't really, if we're being honest, have any major consequences, right? There's often no one relying on you. And so I guess to tie that back to what I was saying about adult friendships, right? It's kind of strange because sometimes you can grieve a friendship that technically still exists, right? And that grief is kind of awkward because there's no villain, right? There's not even a conversation to have. The other person may genuinely be doing the very best that they can, but you are still allowed to notice that the friendship no longer gives you like the closeness that it once did. You're still allowed to miss who you were together. You're still allowed to want more connection without making somebody else wrong, right? Now, speaking from my own experience, okay, I have this really, really good friend, and we were really, really close for years, like in constant contact, right? Meeting up all the time, going on trips and holidays together, okay? There was nothing either of us were ever doing or going through that the other one didn't know about, okay? But now our friendship is nothing like that. And if I'm being completely honest, that actually makes me really sad. But the fact of the matter is, we're just in two completely different places in our lives. We both still care about each other and will always be there for each other, whenever each one of us needs the other one. But there is a distinct distance between us. And I don't just mean that geographically, right? I mean emotionally as well. And if I'm honest, I'm not sure that we'll ever have the same friendship again, right? Because life just won't allow us to at the moment. And that is something that so many adult friendships kind of go through and experience. One of the other things for me is I generally do actually enjoy my own company, right? And I do believe learning to enjoy your own company is actually a gift. There's a sort of freedom in being able to take yourself out, travel alone, spend a weekend in your own space, and not feel that your life only becomes valid when somebody else is present. Because sometimes self sufficiency becomes a defense, right? We say, I prefer my own company, when what we sometimes mean is, I've actually been disappointed so often that relying on myself just feels safer. We sometimes say we don't need anybody. And what we really mean sometimes is that I don't trust anybody will stay. We say, I'm just independent, when what we sometimes mean is I don't know how to admit that I want intimacy without feeling weak, right? Enjoying your own company and wanting connection can coexist, right? You can love your peace and still want a partner. You can also enjoy solo travel and still wish that you had somebody beside you. You can be proud of your home and still wish somebody else's shoes were occasionally by the front door. The goal is not to become so good at being alone that you stop having these emotional needs. The goal is, truthfully, just to know what your needs are and understand that they don't make you less whole. Okay, solitude can feel nourishing. Let's just be truthful, right? It's chosen, it can be creative, peaceful, restorative, and clarifying. But being disconnected feels different. It's the sense that there's literally nobody that you can reach to, in the way that you need. The same Saturday night can be solitude one week, right? It can be great to just be alone and do the things that you enjoy. I don't know, maybe even give yourself an at-home care day, self-care day. But yet the next weekend, it can feel like loneliness, those exact same activities. That's why simplistic advice that we often hear, like learn to love yourself, can sometimes, quite frankly, just be insulting. Right? You can love yourself and still need a community. You can have self-esteem and still want romantic intimacy. You can be emotionally mature and still need somebody to witness your life, right? As human beings, we're relational by nature. Wanting people is definitely not a flaw, right? That self-love should eliminate. Self-love should truthfully just help us recognize the quality of connection that we deserve, right? It shouldn't convince us that having connections with others is unnecessary. So let's also add social media into the equation, right? As it can make loneliness, truthfully, even more confusing because it creates the impression that everybody else is always surrounded by people, okay? There are birthday dinners, weddings, group holidays, baby showers, brunches, couple photos, friendship montages, right? But what we don't see is how somebody felt after the event, right? We don't see whether they felt known and seen in the room. We don't see the friendships that are performative, strained, or quite frankly, inconsistent. We don't see the person who posted the photograph and then went home feeling completely empty. Social media can also conceal our own loneliness because it gives us those like micro doses of contact. We watch stories, we react to posts, we exchange voice notes. We know what people are doing, but knowing what somebody's updates are is not the same as actually being part of their life. Digital connection can support real intimacy, right? But it can't always replace that consistency, presence, and care. Now, I don't want this conversation to end with just put yourself out there because that phrase is so dismissive and quite frankly unrealistic. Okay, building connection as an adult, truthfully, it does require effort. It also requires realism and gentleness. It may mean it may actually mean being more direct with your existing friends, just simply telling them, I miss you. Okay. Can we make seeing each other more regular? It may mean allowing yourself to be the person who initiates without immediately deciding that initiation means that the other person doesn't care. It may mean, joining spaces where repeated contact is possible. You could join a class, a community group, a professional network, get yourself a hobby, start volunteering, maybe get more involved with your church or fitness, or join an online community such as the Blaque Noire Sisterhood over on Facebook, right? That also creates like a real conversation. It may mean, truthfully, just saying yes to an invitation when your first instinct is to retreat and say no. It may mean asking for a phone call instead of maintaining another friendship through like memes or forwarding reels, as I do all the time. It may mean acknowledging that some friendships are meaningful, but truthfully are no longer capable of meeting what your emotional needs are at this point in your life. And sometimes, that therefore may mean getting support from, it could be a counselor or a therapist. And doing that, especially when loneliness has become like a persistent, painful, and potentially tied to depression. The point is not to force connection with anybody available, right? The point is to stop treating the desire for connection as something shameful because it really isn't. There's another side to this conversation, right? Wanting a connection cannot mean that you put your entire life on a hold while you wait for somebody to choose you. Okay, go book the table, take the trip, go to the event, wear the outfit, start the business, make the memory, okay? Not because you should pretend that you don't want company, but because your life is already happening. Okay, so me myself, right, I've recently booked a ticket to an event, which I won't lie, I would love to go to someone with. I'd love to go with someone, but as it currently stands, I don't have anyone to go with me. But I don't want to miss out on it again. I didn't go to it last year because I would have had to go alone then too. Okay. But I literally decided the other week, you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna go and have a great time. Okay. It's about building a life with room for connection, not a life that can only begin once that connection appears. The right people should be able to join a life that's alive. They shouldn't be responsible for resurrecting the one that you essentially abandoned whilst you were waiting for somebody to come in. Now, do you know what? I think maybe the most honest thing some of us can say is, I'm grateful for my life, but I want it to feel more shared. I'm independent, but I want to be cared for. I enjoy my own company, but I miss intimacy. I do have people, but I still sometimes feel lonely. And none of those statements cancel each other out. Okay. Loneliness doesn't mean that you're unwanted, okay? It doesn't mean that you failed. It simply means there's a part of you asking for connection, witness, consistency, and truthfully just care. That part of you doesn't need to be shamed into silence, right? That's the part of you that really needs to be listened to. Okay, as always, I would really love to hear your thoughts on this one. Feel free to complete the sentence in the comments, like the kind of connection I miss most is, and then, you can keep it as brief or as honest as you want, right? And as always, thank you very much for joining me, okay? Please like this episode and subscribe to the channel, maybe even forward this episode to another woman who might be in need of it, okay? And join the Blaque Noire Sisterhood, right? Connect with other women experiencing something similar, okay? And don't forget that the Blaque Noire edit arrives every single Sunday into your inbox, and it has, I guess, it's a deeper written reflection on the topics that we talk about here on YouTube as well. And as always, thank you so, so much for being here, and I will see you in the next conversation.